Hey guys, tonight we're entering a hall so stunning that you're here at a huge banquet for a tired king. And honestly, if you were actually sitting at this table, you probably wouldn't have made it past the first course. Food allergies, questioning medieval hygiene, or, the occasional poisoning. Not exactly a dinner party you take lightly. So, before you relax, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But if you're really enjoying my work here, and hey, while you're at it, leave a comment with your location and local time. I'm always curious to know where and when people are listening. You walk through heavy oak doors that swing wide with a long, groaning sound. The hall feels impossibly large, as though the ceiling floats in the dark sky itself. The glow of hundreds of beeswax candles flickers off bronze platters and goblets, giving everything a liquid shimmer, like sunlight rippling across a pond. The air is thick, dense with the scent of roasted venison, honeyed breads, and spiced wine, layered so deeply it almost feels edible. The sound of laughter, clinking cups and chair legs dragging across stone is all around you. Some voices are loud, rough with ale, while others lean soft and conspiratorial, slipping into your ear like secrets you were never meant to hear. The king's banner hangs above the head table, crimson cloth embroidered with a fading gold thread. It sways slightly, though no breeze stirs in this closed hall. The effect is unsettling, as though the symbol itself is restless. One historical fact worth noting here. Medieval feasts like this often lasted for hours, sometimes even days, stacked with multiple courses, elaborate shows, and dishes designed to impress more than nourish. They weren't just dinners, they were public statements of wealth, power, and stability. A lesser-known detail slips into your awareness: the custom of gilded food. Yes, they actually covered some meats and pastries in edible gold leaf, shimmering like treasure on a plate. It was less about taste and more about flaunting wealth, though honestly, who doesn't want their dinner to sparkle a little? And as you linger near the door, taking in the endless tables stretching into candlelight, you can't help but wonder. Historians still debate whether these feasts were truly celebratory, or thinly veiled battlefields of subtle insults, suspicious gifts, and political games disguised as dinner. You shift forward, moving among the murmuring nobles and rustling servants, as the heart of the feast begins to beat louder, pulling you toward the place where history will tilt into mystery. The cupbearer steps into view, a quiet shadow beside the king's throne-like chair. You notice him not because he speaks, but because he doesn't. His silence is purposeful, his movements almost ritual. In this hall of laughter and clashing goblets, his presence is steady, controlled, and nearly invisible. Yet every sip the king takes passes through him first. He wears no crown, no jewels, no silks. His clothing is simple but clean, linen pressed flat, sleeves rolled neatly, boots polished but unremarkable. A servant's uniform, yes, but carried with the posture of someone who knows his importance. He is both everywhere and nowhere, a man trusted with a task so intimate it could decide the fate of a kingdom. One undeniable historical fact is that cupbearers, in many medieval and earlier courts, were among the most trusted servants. Their duty wasn't just pouring wine. It was ensuring the safety of every drop, every swallow, every toast. To poison a king, you had to bypass the cupbearer, or convince him to betray his master. But here's a lesser-known detail. Cupbearers often had influence that far exceeded their station, because they were always near the ruler's ear, sometimes literally leaning in to whisper. They could carry secrets, deliver private advice, or sway decisions in subtle ways. Think of them less like waiters and more like human security systems with access to privileged information. He lifts a goblet from the long oak table, fills it slowly from a silver pitcher, and without hesitation, sips from it himself. His face remains impassive, unreadable. Then he places it before the king with the precision of someone who's repeated this motion thousands of times. And still, the question lingers in your mind. Historians still wonder if cupbearers were as incorruptible as tradition suggests. Was this loyalty absolute, or could fear, gold, or revenge crack the quiet armor of trust? If this cupbearer survived tonight's poison, did that mean he was innocent, or something else entirely? For now, you only see a man doing his duty with flawless calm, a figure who seems almost invisible among the glittering nobility, yet who stands at the very center of the storm to come. The king sits at the center of it all. His figure is unmistakable, even through the haze of smoke rising from torches and roasted meats. Age has softened his shoulders and carved deep grooves around his eyes, but he wears a smile that feels carefully placed, like armor polished one last time before battle. His crown rests slightly askew, less a symbol of power now, and more a reminder of its weight. You notice the way his hand trembles ever so slightly when he lifts his jeweled goblet. Not from fear, no. He's raised cups at feasts far more dangerous than this, but from exhaustion, the sort that seeps into a man who has spent decades at war, negotiating peace and outliving rivals who once seemed eternal. The hall quiets when he stands, the scraping of benches and clatter of cutlery dying into silence. He holds his cup high, and the jewels set into the metal catch the candlelight, scattering it like tiny suns across the room. His voice, though hoarse with age, fills the hall with practiced authority. Here's one solid historical fact. Kings of the late medieval era often used these banquets as a stage for their final displays of strength or reconciliation. Feasts weren't just meals, they were deliberate performances where every gesture, every toast carried meaning. A king's last banquet was not unusual, though no one in the room ever knew it would be the last until later. And tucked into that moment is a curious, lesser-known detail. Some records suggest that kings occasionally drank from specially designed goblets with hidden compartments at the base. These weren't for poison, they were for jewels, relics, or tiny charms meant to symbolize protection. Whether this king's cup carried such a secret is lost to time, but the thought makes the wine in his hand seem heavier. He raises the goblet, his voice echoing against the vaulted ceiling. You watch the faces below him, lords, ladies, knights and servants, all tilting upward, each expression its own story. Admiration, calculation, boredom, hunger, suspicion, a gallery of emotions disguised in candlelight. And you can't help but ask yourself, as historians still do, was his smile genuine in this moment? Did he believe peace was truly within reach, or was he already bracing for betrayal? The line between joy and wariness is as thin as the wine's surface trembling inside his cup. The room waits, suspended, as the king's words gather in the hush like the final notes of a song yet to be sung. The moment arrives when the hall holds its collective breath. The king, still standing with his crown tilted just slightly, raises his goblet high. The long table stretches before him like a river of silver platters and roasted game, but all eyes are fixed on the cup that glitters in his hand. You can almost hear the fabric of sleeves shifting as nobles lean in closer, waiting for the words that will frame the night. The clatter of knives and spoons fades, replaced by that tense quiet, only broken by a cough here, a shuffle there. And then the king speaks. His voice, though raspy, carries strength, like a fading fire that still knows how to burn. He toasts to peace. His words are carefully chosen, smooth enough to glide across the hall, but edged with the weight of battles past. He calls for an end to wars that drained the treasury, the people, and perhaps his own bones. He speaks of sons who should grow up without swords in their hands, of fields free to yield wheat instead of graves. Here's a solid historical fact. Peace treaties in the medieval era were often celebrated with elaborate banquets. The ritual of feasting wasn't just merriment. It was meant to seal agreements, to show unity, to bind old enemies through food and wine. In theory, breaking bread together was a symbol of trust. In practice, it didn't always guarantee anything. A curious little detail: some feasts actually included symbolic foods tied to peace. Dishes shaped like doves, breads baked in the form of clasped hands, or wines mixed from vineyards on both sides of a conflict. Imagine drinking a blend made from grapes of rival lands. It was political theater in a cup. As you watch the king's goblet tilt, wine spilling like liquid gold into his mouth, the thought creeps in. Historians still argue whether he truly believed this peace would last. Was the toast a genuine hope, or was it only a performance, a final show meant for history's ears rather than his own heart? The goblets clink, the hall erupts in cheers, and for one shimmering instant it feels as if peace really is possible. A fragile dream, fragile enough to rest on the rim of a cup. The cheer still hangs in the rafters when the moment shatters. The king's goblet slips from his hand, striking the table with a hollow clang before toppling to the floor. Wine splashes across the rushes like spilled sunlight, though in the flickering glow it almost looks like blood pooling at his boots. For an instant, no one moves. A room built for laughter and music holds only silence now, stretched so taut it seems it might break. Then, chairs scrape against stone as guests leap to their feet. A lord drops his fork with a clatter, a lady gasps behind her jeweled hand, and servants freeze mid-step with trays still balanced. The king's body folds forward onto the table, scattering a plate of sugared almonds that roll noisily across the wood. The sight is jarring, not the dramatic collapse of battle, but the weary slump of a man undone by something invisible. His crown tilts farther, slipping like a forgotten trinket, while his fingers twitch once against the grain of the oak. Here's one historical fact worth anchoring to this chaos. Sudden deaths at feasts weren't unheard of in medieval courts. Poisoning was always suspected, but far more often the culprit was illness, contaminated food, or simply age. Banquets were exhausting, heavy affairs, and rulers weren't immune to the strain. Yet a lesser-known detail makes this moment sharper. Many kings employed testers not only for wine, but also for bread, meat, even sauces, sometimes multiple servants in succession. To see a ruler fall while every safeguard remained intact sent ripples of panic far beyond the hall. If poison was here, it had outsmarted the system. And as the king slumps further, his beard brushing the remnants of his feast, the question hangs over the stunned company. A question historians still cannot answer. Was this collapse the hand of an assassin, or the body of an old man simply giving way beneath the weight of years? The torches hiss, the wine spreads, and in that dim glow, the hall feels less like a celebration and more like a tomb suddenly claimed by silence. All around the fallen king, the hall bristles with shock. Yet one figure remains upright, steady, almost unreal in his calm: the cupbearer. His hand still rests on the stem of a second goblet, his posture frozen like a statue caught mid-breath. Every guest's eyes shift toward him, suspicion burning hotter than the torches. He should be dead, they whisper without words. If poison claimed the king, why not him? After all, the cupbearer tasted the same wine, sampled the same food. He stands alive while his master lies slumped across the table, motionless. The man's face, however, reveals nothing. No sweat beads on his brow, no twitch of panic tugs at his lip. He bows slightly, as though still performing his role, even in this unraveling storm. His calm unsettles the room more than grief would have. Here's the grounding fact. Cupbearers were indeed required to drink from their master's wine before serving it. In theory, this tradition was the ultimate safeguard, since a servant's death would signal danger before the king drank. But history records moments when cupbearers survived, whether through luck, different preparation, or, so some suspected, complicity. And then there's a stranger, lesser-known detail. In certain courts, the cupbearer's position was not merely protective, it was ceremonial, with sips so small they hardly counted as true tests. A droplet on the lips, not a mouthful. Enough to honor the ritual, but perhaps not enough to share in a fatal dose. That possibility makes the hall's whispers swell into murmurs too loud to ignore. The open question looms larger with every flicker of the torches. Historians still wonder, was this cupbearer a loyal servant who narrowly escaped death, or was he the hand that guided the poison in the first place? His survival makes him both suspect and survivor, hero and betrayer, depending on which tale you choose to believe. For now, he stands silently beside the toppled crown, the lone figure untouched by the invisible weapon that has felled a king. The hall hums with unease, like a hive disturbed at dusk. You can almost feel the tension crawling across the long oak tables as voices lower to hushed tones, every word clipped and careful. It begins with one whisper, then another, until the room is thick with suspicion carried from mouth to ear, like smoke curling through rafters. Poison. The word drifts among the guests, though no one dares to shout it. Nobles tug at their sleeves, shifting uneasily, as if the very air might be laced with danger. Some stare at their cups, suddenly unwilling to sip. Others push plates away, meat half-carved and cooling in front of them. Even the most confident lords begin to eye their goblets like gilded traps. One clear historical fact rises above the rumors. Medieval banquets were notorious breeding grounds for gossip. What began as speculation could harden into political truth by morning. A single whisper at a feast could topple reputations faster than a sword ever could. Tonight, the whispers bloom like weeds, unstoppable and sly. Yet tucked among them is a curious, lesser-known detail. In some courts, nobles actually brought their own tasters, trailing them like shadows into feasts. These personal testers hovered nearby, sampling food before their master dared a bite. The presence of such guards tonight would only thicken the mistrust. If one man has fallen, perhaps no tester is safe. And the question that historians still circle returns to your ear. Was this moment truly one of discovery or of performance? Did the guests genuinely suspect poison in real time? Or did chroniclers, writing years later, paint their whispers into the tale to heighten its drama? After all, history loves a good stage whisper. The murmurs grow louder, each face sharper in the glow of trembling candlelight. You sense that whatever truth lingers here has already begun to slip away, tangled in rumor before the king's body even cools. The servants, once invisible in their steady rhythm of pouring wine, carrying trenchers and sweeping crumbs, suddenly become the focus of every narrowed eye. You notice how they stiffen beneath the weight of suspicion, their movements jerky now where once they were smooth. A platter clatters against the edge of the table, and the sound rings louder than it should, echoing against the vaulted ceiling like an accusation. They are everywhere, at the edges of the feast, gliding between benches, bending low to refill cups. They know the kitchens, the storage rooms, the spice jars. They move through the king's food like shadows touching every dish. And now, in this moment, that knowledge becomes danger. A grounded fact here. In medieval courts, servants often bore the first blame when something went wrong at a feast. Poison, theft, even spoiled meat. All suspicion sank downward onto those who handled the platters. Rarely did it matter whether the accusation was fair. But here's a lesser-known, unsettling detail. Some households deliberately rotated servants between lords, swapping kitchens and staff during great feasts. The reasoning was simple. If no one was familiar with the food or guests, no servant could be accused of bias or conspiracy. Of course, this also meant suspicion could spread without anchor, attaching itself to anyone in an apron. And still the open question lingers, like smoke in your lungs. Historians still wonder if a servant could realistically pull off such a plot. Could someone with no wealth, no land, no allies, really outwit a hall filled with nobles and guardians? Or were these suspicions merely the convenient scapegoating of the powerless? As the torches spit and crackle, you see the servants bowing lower, moving slower, their hands trembling as they clear dishes that no one dares to finish. And in their silence you sense a quiet plea. Don't look too closely. Don't choose us as your answer. The whispers shift, no longer circling the servants alone. Now they creep toward the long table where rival lords sit, draped in velvet and jewels, their faces carefully blank, their eyes anything but. Old grudges simmer just beneath the surface, and in this hall, suspicion finds them easily. You notice the way one lord leans back, arms folded across his chest, lips curled in what might be a smirk or maybe just the twitch of a nervous tick. Another fiddles with his signet ring, twisting it around his finger again and again, as though trying to spin away the weight of unseen accusation. And yet another keeps his gaze fixed firmly on the floor, refusing to meet the eyes darting toward him. One solid historical fact: noble rivalries were often sharper than swords. Many lords lived with one foot in loyalty and the other in rebellion, depending on which way the crown tilted. At a feast celebrating peace, jealousy could be as intoxicating as the wine, especially if peace meant a rival gained more than you did. A quirky, lesser-known detail. Some noble families reportedly brought their own spices to feasts, tiny pouches tucked away, pinches sprinkled over their food. It wasn't about taste, it was about trust. By seasoning their meals themselves, they dodged the chance of anyone tampering with their portions. Imagine nobles sprinkling cinnamon defensively, like culinary body armor. And beneath it all lies the question historians still argue. If a nobleman had orchestrated this, would he have dared to sit here tonight, feasting and drinking under the same torches? Or was his role so hidden, so tangled in alliances, that no one dared point a finger in the moment? After all, accusing the wrong lord could spark a feud fiercer than the king's wars had ever been. The hall feels tighter now, as if the stone walls lean inward. The nobles shift in their seats, eyes darting, each glance heavier than steel. The king lies silent, and above him, power begins to reshuffle itself, quiet and dangerous, like cards dealt in the half-light. Through the flicker of torchlight, your gaze drifts toward the queen. She sits only a breath away from her fallen husband, her hands folded neatly on the table, her face unreadable like a mask carved from marble. While lords mutter and servants tremble, she remains still, her silence somehow louder than the whispers around her. Her eyes move once, briefly, over the king's body, but her expression does not break. No gasp, no tears, no scream, only a calm that unsettles the company more than any display of grief might have. You sense every guest wondering the same thing. Is this composure born of strength or knowledge? One historical fact gives weight to this moment. Queens in many medieval courts wielded influence that extended well beyond the throne. Though not always public, their power worked through alliances, marriage contracts, land inheritances, and quiet persuasion. A queen could shift the balance of an entire kingdom without ever lifting a sword. And here is a lesser-known, peculiar detail. Some queens were believed to keep private apothecaries, little collections of herbs, oils, and powders used for medicine, or, depending on one's suspicion, for other purposes. A vial of rosemary water might heal or conceal. The line between remedy and poison was far thinner than most would like to admit. The open question presses into the silence. Historians still wonder if queens in such positions were ever truly suspects, or if their proximity made them convenient scapegoats. Was a calm expression like hers a sign of innocence, dignity preserved under watchful eyes? Or was it the look of someone who already knew the outcome, because she had helped to arrange it? Around her, the feast churns in nervous energy, but she sits as still as a statue, the only figure in the room who seems untouched by panic. And that very calm makes her the most mysterious presence of all. Not far from the queen, the air lingers in the glow of the torches. A young man, or perhaps not so young anymore, depending on which chronicler you trust, standing half in shadow, half in destiny. His fingers drum lightly against the table, a rhythm too quick to be casual. He has just watched his father collapse, and now, in a single heartbeat, the path before him shifts from waiting to ruling. He looks around the hall with wide eyes, but you notice the flickers of calculation behind them. He is gauging the nobles, reading the servants, measuring the silence of his mother. His throat works as though he might speak, yet no words come. The crown, so recently tilted on his father's head, already hovers invisibly above his own. Here's the grounding fact. Heirs often spent years in a strange limbo, neither powerless nor fully in command. They were groomed for the throne, trained in diplomacy, battle, and ritual, yet still overshadowed by their reigning parent. When that parent died suddenly, the heir's world changed in an instant, and every choice became a test of survival as much as leadership. And here's the lesser-known, almost theatrical detail. Some heirs carried small tokens of legitimacy on their person: rings, relics, even fragments of parchment bearing oaths, ready to flash at the very moment succession became urgent. It wasn't just symbolism, it was insurance against rivals who might seize the throne in the confusion. You wonder now if this young man feels the weight of such an object tucked secretly against his chest. The open question lingers, heavy as the unclaimed crown. Historians still debate whether this heir trembled in fear or if relief crept through him. Did he mourn a father lost, or did he quietly recognize the end of waiting? Power has a way of blurring grief, and no candlelight can reveal what truly moved behind his steadying gaze. For now, he remains seated, caught between silence and speech, the hall holding its breath to see if he will rise. The hall still buzzes with murmurs when attention turns to the invisible killer itself, the poison. No one names it outright, but you can feel the curiosity prickling at the edges of the feast. What was strong enough to drop a king mid-toast, yet subtle enough to leave his cupbearer untouched? The question coils through the air like smoke from a dying candle. Theories spill out in hushed voices. Some mutter of deadly herbs slipped into the wine belladonna, perhaps, with its sweet, deceptive taste. Others whisper of powders ground from minerals, arsenic or mercury, metals that shimmer harmlessly yet burn the body from within. A few even suggest the poison was baked into the sugared almonds now scattered across the king's plate. A firm historical fact anchors these rumors. Poisons were well known in medieval Europe. Physicians studied them, rulers feared them, and apothecaries often kept shelves of substances that blurred the line between cure and curse. A pinch could heal a fever, but a pinch too much could end a reign. But here's a lesser-known, almost eerie detail. Some poisons of the time acted not instantly but hours, even days, after being swallowed. A ruler could raise his cup one night, then fall ill mysteriously the next morning, leaving guests to wonder if the feast or fate had struck him down. The drama of this king collapsing mid-toast seems almost too sudden, too theatrical, to match many known poisons. And so the open question clings stubbornly to the story. Historians still debate whether poison was truly the cause, or if the king's failing heart, weakened by years of strain and age, chose that moment to falter. Was it murder, Or was it timing that history later painted darker than it was? For now, the goblet lies on its side, wine soaking into the rushes, while the guests lean closer, whispering theories that will echo far beyond this hall. The feast itself still sprawls across the long oak tables, untouched now, though it had been arranged with a care bordering on theatre. Platters of roasted swan gleam under the candlelight, their wings re-feathered with gilded paper to shimmer like creatures halfway between bird and relic. Trays of pies, rich with spices carried overseas, sit cracked open to reveal steaming layers of venison and fruit. Sugared almonds and candied ginger glint like jewels scattered between goblets. To you, it feels like a museum display, food preserved not to be eaten but to send messages. Because in truth, every dish here is less about taste and more about meaning. Here's a grounding fact. Medieval banquets often turned food into politics. Serving exotic spices announced trade wealth, while certain meats like swan or peacock were symbols of pride, victory, or dynastic continuity. To eat them was to remind everyone watching that power reached beyond borders and seas. And here's the quirky, lesser-known detail. Some records suggest dishes were sometimes shaped into symbolic forms, a fish baked into the likeness of a ship, bread molded into towers, even jellies cast to resemble coats of arms. To serve such foods was to stage a silent play in edible form. A feast became a story told with knives and platters. And so the question historians still turn over, was this king's last banquet designed as a celebration of peace or as a final assertion of dominance? Were the gilded birds and jeweled sweets meant to charm allies or remind rivals of what power truly tasted like? As the hall murmurs and the king lies still, the untouched dishes remain, steaming gently, a table laid out like a puzzle. Every plate carries meaning, but tonight no one dares to take another bite. The music drifts faintly through the unsettled air, thin and trembling now, as though even the minstrels feel the weight of what has happened. They sit at the edge of the hall, plucking strings and blowing softly into pipes, their notes hesitant, like children speaking out of turn. Yet the melody persists, weaving around the long tables, filling the silence that might otherwise collapse entirely into panic. It was meant to be a celebration tune, light, lilting, the kind of music that usually coaxed feet into dancing and voices into song. But here, in this moment, it becomes something else. It scores the king's final breaths, the crown's sudden vacancy, the feast's unraveling into rumor. The players, likely unaware of what has transpired in full, keep strumming as though their song can still hold the evening together. Here's a grounding fact. Entertainment was an essential part of great feasts. Minstrels, jugglers, storytellers, and dancers were all hired not only to amuse, but also to remind guests of the host's wealth and taste. Music was as important as wine. It kept the mood alive, softened the edges of disputes, and distracted from awkward silences. A lesser-known detail adds a strange layer here. Sometimes, songs at these feasts were chosen specifically for their words, carrying hidden messages. A ballad about loyalty, a verse about betrayal, even a tune recalling past victories, all were subtle ways of reminding guests of history, of debts, of promises. Tonight's music, though likely unplanned, might later be remembered as ominously fitting, a soundtrack to treachery. And the question remains, historians still wonder whether the chroniclers who described this moment exaggerated the coincidence. Did the minstrels really keep playing as the king collapsed? Or did storytellers writing later imagine it that way, crafting tragedy into theatre? After all, history loves irony almost as much as it loves kings falling at banquets. The strings hum, the pipes sigh, and in the flickering light the final song of the night curls into the rafters, soft and uneasy, as if even music knows it has outlived its purpose. The king's chair looms empty now, a stark shape against the shimmer of candlelight. Only moments ago it anchored the feast, a throne disguised as furniture, radiating presence even when he shifted or slouched within it. Now it stands abandoned, its carved arms catching shadows, its cushion indented like a ghost of the body that had filled it. The emptiness feels heavier than the crown toppled nearby. You notice how guests avoid looking directly at it, as though the sight alone could summon bad fortune. A lord coughs into his fist, a lady stares at her jeweled ring, a servant fusses too long with a fallen napkin, everyone busy with gestures that keep their eyes from straying toward that vacant seat. Here's a firm historical fact. In medieval courts, an empty throne or chair was often considered more than absence. It was a potent symbol. During ceremonies, even a vacant seat could represent authority, justice, or divine presence. To see it unoccupied in the wrong context was unsettling, a reminder that power had slipped into uncertainty. And here's a lesser-known, almost haunting detail. Some chronicles describe the practice of leaving the king's chair untouched after sudden death, no one daring to sit until succession was declared. Servants might continue to set food before it for days, as though feeding the shadow of a ruler who had not yet formally released his place. The open question lingers, casting its own long shadow. Historians still wonder whether the silence around this empty chair meant respect, fear, or opportunity. Was it a sign that the court awaited order, or that every eye was already calculating how quickly that vacancy might be filled? The torches hiss, the feast cools, and the chair sits unmoving, more powerful in its emptiness than it ever was while occupied. The hall, still ringing with unease, seems to tilt toward a darker question. Why? Why now? Why here? Why him? Around the table, every guest wears a mask of composure, yet beneath it you sense the churn of motives, each one as sharp as the knives still lying beside untouched plates. Gold, for one, always gold. If the king had fallen, debts could be erased, inheritances accelerated, lands redistributed with the stroke of a quill. Rivals might suddenly find themselves wealthier without lifting a finger. Land, too, waits in the shadows. A disputed border, a castle once promised, an estate too long withheld. Tonight's death could redraw maps more efficiently than any siege. And then there is revenge, that old companion of power. Some in the room had lost sons to the king's wars, brothers to his justice, fortunes to his taxes. What better place to answer blood with wine than in the very hall where he raised his toast? Here's a solid historical fact. Medieval courts were riddled with factions, each driven by overlapping ambitions. The line between ally and enemy was paper-thin, often shifting overnight. When a king died suddenly, chaos spread not because no one had motive, but because everyone did. A lesser-known, quietly unsettling detail. Sometimes poisons of the era were nothing more than strong herbs slipped into dishes, too bitter for one palate, fatal for another. This meant the death of a king might not have been deliberate at all, but the unlucky overlap of healing lore and frailty, a motive mistaken perhaps for murder. And yet the question persists, coiling tighter. Historians still wonder if the motives swirling in that hall were real causes or simply convenient stories invented later. Did someone truly act on greed, land, or vengeance? Or did a weary body falter, only for rumor to cloak the fall in intrigue? You sit among them, the air thick with possibilities, every face a riddle, every silence a secret, and the feast no longer tastes of food, but of hidden agendas. The cupbearer is pulled into the center of the storm at last. Questions curl around him like smoke, unspoken but heavy. How could he stand untouched while the king crumpled beside him? His survival is as suspicious as it is miraculous. You watch as he bows again, a movement that feels more like armor than courtesy. His eyes remain lowered, his hands folded, his face calm. He offers no explanation, no defense, just the silence of someone who has rehearsed composure for years. And yet, that very silence sharpens suspicion. Here's a firm historical fact. Cupbearers were often interrogated first in cases of suspected poisoning. They were closest to the wine, closest to the ruler's lips, and therefore closest to blame. Some were tortured for answers, others exiled, a few executed outright. Trust made them powerful, but it also made them vulnerable. Now, a lesser-known, curious detail. In certain courts, cupbearers were actually nobles themselves, not mere servants. Their position was so trusted that only men of rank could be given the task, ensuring loyalty by binding their own fortunes to the king's survival. If this was true here, then the cupbearer's innocence, or guilt, carried implications far beyond one man's life. And the question historians still struggle with sharpens into focus. If the cupbearer lived through the same sip, what does that mean? Did he cleverly fake his tasting, skimming his lips across the rim without swallowing? Did he drink, but in such a small measure that fate spared him? Or was he impossibly complicit in administering a poison immune to his own body? For now, he remains a figure of contradiction, both the man who should have died first and the man who walked away untouched. A loyal guardian or a hidden traitor, a shadow at the king's side whose survival tells its own story, though no one agrees on which version to believe. Time passes strangely in the banquet hall. The body of the king remains slumped over the table, the crown still glinting faintly where it fell, and yet the scene has already begun its transformation. What began as shock will soon become story, and story, as always, will not stay still. Chroniclers hover at the edges of your imagination, quills scratching, inkpots trembling on wooden desks, ready to turn this night into words that will outlive everyone present. But already, even in whispers, the tale shifts. Some guests swear the king cried out before he collapsed. Others insist he fell silently. One claims the cupbearer trembled. Another remembers him steady as stone. Memory, fractured and biased, is already rewriting the truth before it reaches parchment. Here's the firm historical fact. Medieval chronicles were rarely neutral. They bent toward the patron who paid for them, toward the politics of the moment, toward the moral lessons scribes wanted to preserve. Events like this banquet lived many lives on paper, each shaped by the hand that recorded it. And here's the curious, lesser-known detail. Some chroniclers were notorious for embellishment, not merely in words, but in the little decorations at the margins of their manuscripts. A poisoned king might be painted beside grinning rabbits with swords, or birds carrying banners, symbols only half related to the text, but fully meant to color the reader's imagination. History, even in ink, was never just fact. It was also art, and sometimes satire. And so the open question lingers. Historians still wonder how much of this banquet's drama is real, and how much is embroidery layered on after the fact. Did the music truly keep playing? Did whispers really rise like a tide? Or were those touches added later, crafted to make a tragic fall into a theatrical tale worth retelling? The hall grows dimmer as the torches gutter low, but you can almost hear the scratching of pens centuries later, rewriting this night into legend. The question lingers in the air, as persistent as candle smoke. Who truly poisoned the king? Even centuries later, the answer slips through history's fingers like sand. Scholars debate endlessly, piecing together fragments of testimony, corroded letters, and the whispers of chroniclers whose biases often outweigh their facts. Some argue it was a jealous noble, one of the many rivals who had long gritted their teeth against the crown. Others insist it was a servant, a small hand orchestrating fate from below the notice of lords. A few suggest the Queen herself might have played a part, her calm composure that night hinting at a hidden plot. And of course, some historians still maintain that there was no poison at all, just a king whose years finally caught up with him, collapsing in perfect, ironic timing. A grounding historical fact. Unsolved royal deaths were common in medieval Europe, and almost every case became a tangle of rumor, embellishment, and speculation. Deaths at court. Here's a lesser-known detail that adds flavor to the mystery. In some accounts, the cupbearer is described as having survived because he had, intentionally or not, consumed a tiny antidote beforehand, a powder slipped into his mouth by a sympathetic apothecary. Or, as other versions suggest, he simply drank less than the king, an innocent act of moderation that saved him. The truth remains hidden in the shadows of legend. And still the open question persists. Historians still debate, was the king betrayed by those closest to him, or by fate itself? Did power demand treachery, or did the fragility of life simply intervene at the worst possible moment? Every theory carries its own weight, and no single answer satisfies all the evidence. You feel the mystery settling around you like a gentle fog, wrapping the hall, the guests, and even the long empty chair in a timeless hush. The torches flicker lower, their warm glow softening the hard edges of the hall. Shadows stretch across the long tables, reaching toward the empty throne, the toppled crown, the scattered almonds. The guests begin to drift away, some carried by whispers of rumor, others by the simple need to escape the weight of the evening. You linger a moment longer, feeling the history settle around you. Every glance at the empty chair, every thought of the surviving cupbearer, every echo of whispered motives binds the night into a tapestry of intrigue. Time here seems slower, measured not in minutes, but in the unspoken questions hanging like mist. A historical fact. Medieval courts often left such nights unresolved. Death, suspicion, and politics intertwined so tightly that closure was rare. Tales of sudden collapses and miraculous survivals became legend almost as quickly as they occurred. A lesser-known detail adds a delicate twist. Chroniclers sometimes recorded the personal reactions of minor guests. The cook, a young squire, a distant relative, tiny snapshots that give the scene texture and human fragility. Their whispered fear, fascination, and confusion remind us that history is lived by ordinary people as much as by kings and queens. And the question that lingers, historians still wonder if anyone that night ever truly knew the whole story. Was there a poisoner, a plot, a miscalculated risk, or simply the unpredictability of life and timing? Each answer raises another, leaving the mystery alive, even centuries later. As torches gutter out one by one, you feel the hall's echoes fade, replaced by the quiet hum of the night outside. The last shadows stretch long across the stone floor, carrying the unanswered questions gently into the dark. As the night deepens, the hall fades fully into memory. The candles are spent, the torches guttered low, and only a soft, steady quiet remains. You breathe slowly, letting the weight of the banquet, the whispers, the empty throne, and the surviving cupbearer settle gently around you. Outside, the wind moves softly through the trees, carrying the faint scent of smoke and damp earth. Each breath you take matches that quiet rhythm, rising and falling like the gentle sway of leaves in a calm evening. The mysteries of the night, the poisoned king, the whispered motives, the unanswered questions, drift into shadow, not demanding answers now, only acknowledgement. Picture the hall one last time, empty chairs, plates cooling, the faint glint of gold still catching the moonlight through tall windows. You imagine stepping through those doors slowly, leaving the echoes behind, feeling a soft hush settle over the corridors of your mind. Let the tension unwind. Let curiosity relax into the comfortable folds of imagination. The stories of betrayal, survival, and whispered schemes become gentle companions, like a distant tide lapping quietly at the edges of memory. With each exhale, you release the hall's lingering suspense, and with each inhale, you invite calm. The night stretches long and soft. Shadows grow velvety. The air cools just enough to soothe your skin, and the world outside waits patiently for morning. For now, all you need is this gentle hush, this slow drift toward rest. Let your thoughts wander softly, untethered, and settle into the ease of sleep and sweet dreams.